He had the ability to get into Harvard, yet he chose to work as a janitor sweeping floors. When the professor left an unsolved graduation problem on the blackboard, he glanced at it once and immediately wrote down the solution, shocking everyone at MIT. To put this into perspective, the professor himself, a recipient of the Oscar of Mathematics, had once spent over 2 months solving that very problem. However, when the professor tried to meet him, he never showed up. In order to draw out this hidden genius, the professor set an even greater challenge, at least 10 times harder than the last one, a problem that had once taken the entire faculty over 2 years to solve. The next day, when Will passed by the blackboard again, he noticed that the problem had been updated, and unable to resist, he picked up the chalk and started working it out. Just as he was fully absorbed in writing, the professor who had been secretly watching caught him in the act. "What's a janitor doing scribbling here? If you've got nothing better to do, finish your work and get out," the professor scolded. Will couldn't be bothered to explain, so he turned and left, tossing a curse over his shoulder as he walked away. Before the professor could catch up to him, however, his assistant called him back, and when the two of them looked at the blackboard, they were stunned by the solution they saw.
Oh my god. Looks right.
What shocked them even more was that Will had never even attended college. He had only sat in on a few math lectures while sweeping floors, yet he effortlessly solved problems considered impossible in the world of mathematics. And his talent went far beyond that. Since childhood, he had possessed a photographic memory, able to flip through any book once and retain it as though the entire text were stored in his mind. Despite his extraordinary genius, his gift was never properly nurtured, and in daily life he was nothing more than a troublemaking delinquent, skilled at smoking, drinking, and fighting. That night at the bar, Will's friend took the initiative to approach some girls while Will quietly waited nearby. His friend pretended to be a classmate from their history course and started talking confidently about historical topics, but the two girls happened to catch the attention of another guy, a real top student from Harvard. He immediately threw out a question that left Will's friend completely stumped. "Since we're all studying history, what's your take on the Southern market economy?" His friend froze in embarrassment, unable to say a single word, while the Harvard guy smoothly launched into an eloquent discussion across the table. Will couldn't stand watching any longer, so he stepped up to his friend and said, "What are you, a freshman who just finished reading Marx and now you're out here showing off? All you've got is some memorized textbook nonsense, and you're using it to impress girls by making my friend look bad? Maybe you should go back and actually study before you try that again." The guy was left speechless and quickly backed off. Will's sharp wit instantly caught the girls' attention, and as they were leaving, one of them not only came over to strike up a conversation but also handed him her phone number. It turned out that attracting girls with intelligence could be that simple. One day, Will ran into an old enemy on the street and, without a word, landed a heavy punch. The two quickly broke into a brawl, and even after knocking his opponent down, Will refused to stop. When the police stepped in to break it up, he nearly kicked one of them aside, and while fighting was one thing, assaulting an officer was a far more serious matter. Will was arrested on the spot. Meanwhile, when the professor realized that the janitor was actually the genius he'd been seeking, he rushed to the school's maintenance office, only to be told that Will hadn't shown up because he was in court. The professor hurried to the courthouse, where Will didn't even need a lawyer. He defended himself entirely, citing a 200-year-old precedent so effectively that the opposing lawyer couldn't get a single word in response. The judge looked over his file in confusion, fighting, assaulting an officer, resisting arrest. Maybe another judge would pity you for your background, but assaulting a police officer is a serious felony. 3 years in prison, bail set at $50,000, no appeals. And just like that, Will was sent to jail. To track him down, the professor followed him there and explained that he had already spoken with the judge. Under his supervision, Will could be released, but only under 2 conditions. First, he had to meet with the professor every week to study and discuss mathematics. Second, he had to see a psychologist weekly, with regular evaluations, and if he failed them, he'd be sent back. The first condition didn't bother Will, math was second nature to him, but the second one felt completely unnecessary in his eyes. For the sake of his freedom, Will reluctantly agreed to work with the professor on mathematics. What seemed like impossible problems to the professor were nothing more than child's play to him. To deal with the psychologist, he stayed up all night reading through all of the doctor's published works, and during their sessions, he turned the doctor's own theories against him. Within a few exchanges, he managed to strike a nerve so deeply that the doctor lost his temper, stormed out, and called Will a lunatic. The real reason Will did this was to keep anyone from getting too close to his inner world. In this way, he drove away 5 different psychologists, leaving the professor with no choice but to call in his old friend Sean. Sean had been the professor's college roommate and was now a true master of psychology. The professor believed that only Sean could handle Will. He described Will as a rare genius, comparable to India's Ramanujan, who, despite lacking formal mathematical training, left behind thousands of formulas for future generations. In the professor's view, unlocking Will's full potential first required breaking through the walls of his mind. This was the professor's true reason for wanting Will to see a psychologist. At first, Sean was reluctant to get involved, but when he learned that Will had grown up in the same neighborhood as he had, he eventually agreed. Their first meeting took place in Sean's office, and from the moment Will walked in, he carried a strong sense of guardedness. He immediately began scanning the room, gathering details in hopes of using them to break through Sean's psychological defenses. No matter what Sean asked, Will not only gave irrelevant answers but also responded with a strong sense of aggression. As a seasoned psychologist, Sean remained calm and composed, so he tried shifting the conversation to everyday topics. Gradually, Will began to calm down. Unfortunately, before they could really get into a proper conversation, Will's attention was drawn to a watercolor painting by the window, depicting a man rowing a small boat, drifting alone on the open sea. Just by observing the lines and colors, Will perceived Sean's underlying anxiety and loneliness. "You became a psychologist because you were searching for a safe harbor, didn't you?" he said, almost outright diagnosing Sean's mental state. Will then astutely inferred from the solitary boat that Sean was a widower and immediately launched into verbal attacks. Sean's anger flared, especially as Will hit a sensitive nerve, but instead of backing down, Will intensified his provocation. "What happened between you two? Did she abandon you, or was she taken by another man?" Will's words pushed Sean over the edge, and he lunged forward, grabbing Will by the throat in fury.
Ever disrespect my wife again, I will end you. I will fucking end you.
Just as Sean was losing control, Will calmly reminded him that the session was over. After Will left, Sean was left in a deep, lingering sorrow. His wife had died of cancer many years ago, and since then he had completely shut himself off, unwilling even to speak of her to anyone. Will's words were a huge affront. Yet as a reflective intellectual, Sean recognized that despite their rudeness, they had struck a chord deep within him. After a moment of contemplation, he resolved to confront the fears he had long buried. So he told the professor, "I'll take this patient." Back home, Will successfully arranged to meet the bar girl, Skylar, at a small convenience store. Skylar not only came from a privileged background but was also naturally intelligent and hardworking, having successfully gained admission to Harvard Medical School. She had recently inherited a substantial fortune and was planning to continue her studies at Stanford. Yet, she had little interest in the self-important elites at Harvard and was instead drawn to someone like Will, a rebellious troublemaker.
I know you've been thinking about it.
Oh, no.
Did you have you happen to get a good night kiss?
No, I tell you, I was hoping to get a good night late.
Soon it was time for their second meeting, this time by the pond in the park. Sean didn't lecture Will directly. Instead, he spoke calmly and like a friend. He began by honestly admitting, "What you said last time cut me deeply, but I also have some things I want to share with you." He encouraged Will to speak freely about Michelangelo and Shakespeare, and even to quote historical figures when making sarcastic remarks. "You've never truly experienced life, but I have. You can read War and Peace 100 times and still never feel what it's like to have a dying comrade collapse in your arms, but I have. Love isn't just beautiful sonnets, it's the determination to be with someone even when you know they're terminally ill. I've lived through all of this." This time, Will unusually didn't interrupt Sean and began to realize that there was indeed something remarkable about him.
You're an orphan, right?
Do you really think you can understand me through Oliver Twist? Judging a person based on a single book is far too shallow. Unless you want to talk about yourself and who you really are, that's when I might be interested." At that moment, Will fell silent. His genius made him arrogant, yet deep down he was still an ungrown child. He had used his talent and aggression to challenge the world, but had never dared to face his own heart. This conversation broke through his defenses, leaving his inner self ruthlessly laid bare by Sean. From that day on, he became quiet and withdrawn. Even when he dialed Skylar's number, he couldn't bring himself to speak, afraid of the responsibility that accepting this relationship might bring. During subsequent therapy sessions, Will remained silent, simply staring at the clock on the wall and waiting for the hour to end. Sean understood that this was a silent standoff initiated by Will. Not a word was spoken between them for the entire hour, leaving the professor outside puzzled. Yet Sean had his own plan. He knew that in this psychological game, whoever spoke first would lose. To truly treat Will, he had to break through his first psychological defense. Meanwhile, when facing mathematical problems, Will continued to solve them effortlessly, infuriating the mathematicians who had come to challenge him and forcing them to storm out, while the professor looked on with a proud expression. Yet he still worried about Will's psychological struggles. During one therapy session, Will finally broke down and confided in Sean, revealing that he had recently met a girl he liked but feared that getting to know her deeply might ruin the perfection of the feeling. Sean advised him, "You need to learn to accept your own imperfections first, and then use a perspective of perfection to embrace the imperfections of others." Then Sean shared a personal example with Will. "My wife gets gassy whenever she's nervous, and I often wake up in the middle of the night from her farts." Will burst out laughing, a laugh he hadn't felt in a long time. Sean continued, "Yet it's precisely these little quirks that become proof of our closeness. Learning to accept each other's imperfections is the only way to truly enter someone else's world." Soon, it was time for their scheduled session again, and Will still felt somewhat unsatisfied. Sean's words had been profoundly enlightening. After the session ended, Will took the initiative to ask Skylar out. But his first attempt was met with rejection. After all, she was still a student with assignments to finish. Skylar asked him to come back tomorrow, and Will left feeling disappointed. But he didn't want to wait until tomorrow. At a coffee shop, he grabbed a napkin and began writing, then took the completed chemical equation to Skylar's dorm. His solution amazed her, and once again, Will's extraordinary talent won her heart. Will openly acknowledged his relationship with Skylar and introduced her to his friends. He also began gradually opening his own heart, and therapy sessions with Sean became less rigid, with conversations flowing from baseball to women, gradually fostering a warmer bond between them. Just as everything seemed to be moving in a positive direction, an unexpected event occurred. That day, the professor met with Sean and, believing that Will's therapy had been successful, eagerly arranged a prestigious job for him in the national defense technology sector, giving him a chance to fully utilize his talent and potential, potentially turning him into the next Einstein. However, Sean objected. He knew that Will's therapy had only just begun, and a genius with unresolved psychological issues could easily develop warped values and, if left unchecked, become a high-tech criminal. At this stage, Will's mind was still immature, and he didn't yet know which direction he should take. The two old friends ended up arguing fiercely in the office. At that moment, the professor suddenly said, "Don't waste time talking about that, I've already arranged Will's interview." What he didn't know was that it was actually Will's friend who showed up for the interview. Will, unwilling to attend himself, had sent his friend to handle it. The friend's rambling, disjointed answers nearly infuriated the interviewers. Meanwhile, Will was enjoying a sweet date with his girlfriend. Watching Skylar's beaming smile, he began to imagine a happy future together. Yet whenever Skylar suggested meeting his family, Will always found some excuse to dodge the topic. Despite this, she remained deeply in love with this seemingly wayward troublemaker. Their relationship quickly deepened, but love rarely runs smoothly. One day, Skylar received her acceptance letter from Stanford University and hoped Will would move to California with her. Will, however, refused. "Here are my friends, and my mathematical talent has finally been recognized. Moving to a new place would make everything uncertain again," he explained. Skylar saw his refusal as a lack of love, and the disagreement escalated into an argument. Overwhelmed with emotion, Will lost control, cornering Skylar and pounding the wall with his fists. Afraid of leaving the world he knew, he chose to end the relationship himself. He protected himself by hurting others, which was precisely the core of his psychological problem. From that day on, Will returned to square one. While discussing mathematics with the professor, he wore a look of impatience, tired of what he saw as elementary problems and increasingly angered by the professor's attempts to control his life. He began mocking him. "You've spent your whole life in mathematics, and you can't even solve such a simple problem?" The professor's dignity was shaken, though he only wanted to prevent Will from squandering a rare talent that many could only dream of. But Will didn't care and walked away, perhaps unaware of the professor's good intentions, or perhaps too afraid to face his own heart. Not long after, the National Security Agency tracked down Will, eager not to miss out on such a brilliant young mind. Despite the opportunity to work with cutting-edge technology and live a life free from want, Will casually rejected their offer, immediately seeing through their intentions. When pressed on why he wouldn't join, he firmly retorted, "You want to use the codes I decipher to bomb innocent people? That would only fill me with guilt." At that moment, Will was like a hedgehog, bristling and quarrelsome with everyone. Sean tried to reason with him but was met with sharp ridicule. "You're a coward, hiding in grief for years after your wife died. You have no right to lecture me." In less than a day, Will had managed to offend two men who had acted as mentors to him. Perhaps seeking some comfort from his girlfriend, he called Skylar. But faced with her desperate attempts to reconcile, he abruptly ended the call. Disappointed, she boarded her flight to California. Will, unsure of what he truly wanted, went to a construction site and vented his emotions on the walls, hoping that hard labor might help him forget everything. Seeing him in this state, his friend could no longer stay silent and urged him to go back. But Will replied, "Even if I rot here on this site for the rest of my life, I won't go back." His friend, a little frustrated, said, "You have a talent we can only dream of, yet you waste it. I want to drink and have fun with you, but more than that, I want to see you pursue your life and realize your value. Losing you as a close friend won't sadden me, it will actually make me feel proud." Those words left Will utterly speechless, prompting him to reflect deeply on himself. Meanwhile, the professor confronted Sean again, accusing him of failing to properly guide Will at a critical moment for his success. Sean, however, argued that nothing should be rushed. The disagreement quickly escalated into a heated argument, only to be interrupted when Will arrived for his scheduled therapy session. The professor awkwardly stepped out. This time, Will had gained clarity about his life and understood things more fully. He apologized to Sean for his behavior the previous day. Flipping through Will's records, Sean finally understood why his personality was so sharp and defensive. Will had been an orphan since childhood, and his adoptive family often abused him, leaving his body covered in scars. This had made him extremely sensitive and impulsive. His frequent outbursts were, in reality, a way to protect himself. Looking at this young man with such a tragic past, Sean repeatedly reassured him, saying, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault."
Don't fuck with me, alright? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
Will's inner defenses completely collapsed, and he clung to Sean, crying like a child. For the first time in over a decade, he cried so deeply and freely. With Sean's guidance, Will finally overcame the psychological shadows of his childhood, choosing to reconcile with himself and with the world. Soon he celebrated his 21st birthday. His friends pooled their money to buy him a small car as a gift, not only to make his commute easier but also to symbolize their hope that he could use it to find his true self. Although Will joked that it was the ugliest car he had ever seen, deep down he knew it was his most precious gift. Meanwhile, Sean completed Will's psychological therapy, allowing both of them to release the most painful memories from their pasts. He also finally let go of his lingering attachment to his late wife and took the opportunity to request a long leave to embark on a journey, believing that truly living was the only way to find life's meaning. As he packed his luggage, the professor suddenly entered, expressing his apologies for previous misunderstandings. Though they had experienced conflicts and arguments, It had always been for Will's benefit. Their differences lay only in approach and philosophy. In that moment, the two lifelong friends, acquainted for decades, reconciled. That day, as usual, his friend drove over to see Will and knocked on the door, receiving no response. Peering through the glass, he saw the house empty. Just as he had hoped, Will had left without saying goodbye. His sudden departure brought a pang of sadness, but soon his friend felt a sense of relief, understanding that his brother had made the best choice for himself. Meanwhile, Will was behind the wheel of the car his friend had gifted him, speeding down the highway to California. He was going to find the girl he had once pushed away and embark on a brand new chapter of his life. Good Will Hunting is a 1997 American drama directed by Gus Van Sant, starring Matt Damon and Robin Williams. Matt Damon, who plays a brilliant Harvard graduate, also co-wrote the screenplay with his friend Ben Affleck, earning them an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. While the film appears on the surface to be a story of one man's redemption, every character in the story plays an indispensable role. The professor discovered Will's extraordinary talent, Sean healed his wounded soul, his friend encouraged him to take courageous steps, and Skylar became the direction toward his happiness. Together, these people gave Will a sense of being loved. Personal growth is full of obstacles, but for someone whose childhood was marked by trauma, the path is even harder. He not only has to overcome others but, more importantly, must confront and conquer his own inner demons.